Hello everyone. Today I'm going to be going through the role of the paragraph in particular in the EPQ report, whether you're writing a report on an artifact that you've made or on a research question that you've studied. The paragraph, as I've called it here, is a kind of building block of the entire report. So what are we going to cover today? First of all, we're going to be looking at the role of the abstract, and I'll tell you a little bit about this, but I will be doing a separate screencast on how to write an abstract, because an abstract is something that you may want to write last. We're going to be talking about thinking across the whole essay. You can't write paragraphs, as I'll be explaining, unless you've planned the whole essay and you understand what the role and the function of that paragraph is going to be. So I'm going to look at then a paragraph level writing. I'm going to look at the design of paragraphs. And I'm going to be showing you that there's not one paragraph. There are quite a few internet sites that tell you there's one way, there's a formula for a paragraph. Well, quite frankly, that's incorrect. So I'm going to be looking at different types of paragraphs. I'm going to be looking at the role of the topic sentence. I'm going to be looking at development sentences. Some people call them support sentences. I'm going to be looking at this idea of a clincher sentence as well. I'll tell you a little bit about that, and you'll see it's quite effective in terms of essay writing. I'm going to be looking at some examples of good paragraph writing from desk students who've written EPQ reports, and I'll look at two different types of referencing in that. I'll look at paragraphs that use footnotes, that are using the Modern Humanities Research Association idea of referencing, and I'll also be looking at Harvard, which is our favorite referencing technique within the EPQ. Now, just want to start again with reinforcing the importance of this point, okay? Before you begin writing any of the paragraphs, it is absolutely essential that you think across the whole of the essay first. I've used this diagram here to give you a rough idea of what I mean. So before you begin writing your neat copy, you first need to have a structure in mind. And the best way of planning that structure is to do so in blocks or stages of your argument. Now, if you watch my other screencast on structure, I explain how you can use things like subheadings to help you structure the stages of your discussion. And within each of these stages, you may have a number of paragraphs. So an absolute key point that I cannot emphasize enough. Paragraph writing requires global whole text understanding of what the function of that paragraph is within the wider argument. So planning is absolutely key. Now, I'm going to be looking at a fantastic EPQ report today that was written by a former student and submitted in 2018. And the topic of it is forced migrants, burden or benefit. First of all, this is the abstract that the student wrote. The project looks at the recent influx of refugees throughout the world, particularly Europe, and evaluates, really key term there, whether they present a burden or a benefit in society. So the abstract begins with a very clear statement of what this essay is going to do. For those of you who don't know, an abstract is a very brief overview of what the research question is and how the researcher has tried to answer it. And it concludes with a very short summary of what the conclusion of the report is. The goal is to demonstrate how, despite common misconceptions, refugees do not pose a threat to host communities, but also instead offer skills and social pressure that positively affect governments. This has been done by analyzing pre-existing literature on migration in countries like Germany and Finland post-World War II, as well as Kenya after the crisis in Somalia. Furthermore, the impacts of these refugees will be further explained using the case study of Greece. This case study will focus on the effects that refugees have had, particularly on the healthcare system within the country. Upon examination of these events, this research highlights how refugees are not just deviants of society, but instead, if socially integrated effectively, can play a key role within nations. So why even though this screencast is not about the abstract, am I talking to you about an abstract? Well, I think it's absolutely vital that you need to understand that before you can start writing, you have to have a destination. You have to know what your conclusion is going to be. So I'm going to return to that vital point that you need to understand what the structure of your essay is going to be. Now, the abstract is something that is often written last, and it's written last because it's a kind of overview of the whole argument. But once again, I must stress, before writing, you need to know what your destination is. Where do you want to take your reader? What is your conclusion going to be? A well-formed paragraph cannot be written unless you've done that first. Now, moving on. So many of you will have been introduced to this idea of the paragraph in different subjects. It may be in geography or history, it may be in English. The most popular diagram, I think, especially for Key Stage 3, is the idea that a paragraph is like a hamburger. And you have your opening or your topic sentence, which is the top bun. And then you have all of your juicy filling in here, which we could call the supporting detail, the examples, the facts, the more descriptive elements. And then there'll be a closing element, which is the bottom bun in your paragraph, okay? And that really does have some merit, and I think that it's useful to have that kind of design in mind. Here's a different example of it, yeah, that you have a topic sentence, you have a supporting sentence, another supporting sentence, a third supporting sentence, and a concluding sentence, okay? So I think it's worth saying that in many cases you will be using that structure. But I think there's far more variety of paragraphs, especially as you get older and you start to write longer essays, like this report that you write, or when you write a dissertation at university. You will find that the paragraphs have different functions when you have a longer argument. Now, these are just some paragraphs that I've thought of. You can have introductory paragraphs that give you information. You can have information building paragraphs, particularly when you're introducing a new idea and you need to tell your audience about it, so they'll be very information heavy. You can have argumentative paragraphs where perhaps you've given details of a study and this paragraph will concentrate on criticizing and deconstructing that study. You can have evaluative paragraphs where you've looked at a study and you're saying what's good and bad about it. You can have analytical paragraphs where you've broken something down, you've given some detail, and now you're going to go into it and you're going to say how this detail works. And the word analysis means to break things down into smaller parts. You can have transition paragraphs. These are where you are changing the subject. So you might have spoken about, say, if we think about the topic of psychotic people, whether they're genetic or whether they're social. At this point, the paragraph might be signaling that you're moving from the genetic argument to the social argument, and you're going to start discussing whether in fact psychosis is introduced by social conditions, etc. And of course you can have concluding paragraphs. Those are paragraphs that end sections and bring them together and synthesize information. So going back, although this has some merit, as I said, we need to understand that the paragraph is a very versatile tool. And it's very important that we see it in terms of its function at text level, in terms of a far greater global argument. Now, here's another take on the paragraph structure, and I will be using certain elements of this. This is taken from an American university website, and they argue that you should be using a topic sentence, a detail sentence, and a clincher sentence. The reason why I've included this short diagram will be clear to you as I go on, because I want to give you an idea of what a clincher sentence is. Now, a clincher sentence can be defined as a statement, an argument, a fact, or a situation that gives you some kind of conclusion. In academic writing, this is a statement in an expository paragraph which reiterates the topic and gives you a summary of the information that was in the paragraph. A clincher sentence can reinforce your key message. You'll often find clincher sentences in very well-written blogs or essays or a book chapter before a subheading introduces the next section. So a clincher sentence is a kind of soundbite. It sums things up. It can be a nugget of wisdom. And it's a memorable point that can linger in the reader's mind, okay? Now, what I'm going to be arguing is this idea of concluding a paragraph rather, with a clincher sentence can be very, very valuable at times. But I would argue that you don't need it in every single paragraph. Now, I would like to say, again, we've talked a little bit about referencing in this EPQ course. How important it is that we always acknowledge our sources. Here, I'm going to show you a video from the University of Technology, Sydney, a very beautiful university, a very modern one that you can see here. And if you click on this hyperlink that I provided here, it takes you to an academic writing guide for students. And I can't recommend this enough. It's absolutely a superb writing guide. So if you want to do some exercises after listening to this screencast, please go to this particular website with the academic writing guide. I'm just going to show you a short video which I think sums up a great deal about paragraph writing, and I think has a lot of wise words in it.
Welcome to this online video tutorial brought to you by Helps. This video will introduce useful advice on how to write a well-developed paragraph. In a previous online tutorial video, we introduced you to a real-life assignment question and talked about how to structure the introduction and conclusion to an essay. Here is that assignment question. Today, we're going to have a look at the structure of the body paragraph. These paragraphs make up the most substantial part of an essay, report, or case study. The body of your essay will consist of paragraphs which function as building blocks in the construction of your overall paper. The body is where you demonstrate your knowledge and grasp of the material that you've read. It's also where you develop a discussion or argument. In order to substantiate your argument, you'll also need to offer evidence. This could include examples or quotations from authoritative sources. If you experience difficulty in structuring and developing your body paragraphs, you can always talk to a Helps advisor or one of our volunteers. They're always ready to help you if you need assistance at any stage of the writing process. The paragraph is a related group of sentences that develops one main idea. Each paragraph in the body of the essay should include these elements. Firstly, it should contain a topic sentence that clearly states the main or controlling idea. It should then contain supporting sentences to explain and develop the point that you're making. In most instances, your points should be supported by some form of evidence from your readings or examples drawn from the subject area. Don't just leave the evidence hanging there. Remember to analyze and interpret it. You should comment on the implication, significance, or impact, and finish off the paragraph with a critical deduction that you've drawn from the evidence. A concluding sentence that restates your point, analyzes the evidence, or acts as a transition to the next paragraph represents effective writing. In addition to commencing your paragraph with a clear topic sentence, it's important to use linking words and phrases to create cohesion within and across paragraphs in your writing. The words you see on your screen are what we call transition signals or signpost words, and they can help the reader follow the order and flow of your ideas. Now let's try and identify the essential elements to a paragraph by looking at an example taken from our assignment question. If you like, you can pause this video to give you more time to read. You'll notice the first sentence is the topic sentence, which clearly states the theme of the paragraph. This is followed by the explanation or argument, and then substantiated through the integration of evidence and demonstration of examples. Notice that it is important to include some form of critical analysis or observation. Finally, your concluding statement should articulate your voice or opinion. To sum up, let's try to remember the following points. Always recall the essay question as you write, and continually link your body paragraphs to the essay question. To ensure your writing is cohesive and coherent, use linking words. Try to synthesize your evidence into each body paragraph in order to substantiate your points. Whenever you do use evidence, you should follow the referencing guidelines that have been specified by your tutor or lecturer. Don't simply state a fact or describe something. Try to demonstrate to the lecturer that you have an opinion on the subject. It's very important to make your voice transparent throughout your writing. If you feel that you need more help in writing an assignment, you can get free help at the Helps unit. We're located in Building 1, Level 3, Room 8, just across from the Concourse Cafe and the Careers Office. Our contact details appear on your screen. Please feel free to come and visit us and chat to an advisor about receiving academic language support to complete your assessments. We're at your service.
Naturally, the University of Technology in Sydney will not be at your service, but you'll be pleased to hear that there is an EPQ team that you can always consult on essay structure and planning. We won't be able to do the work for you, of course, because that would be against exam regulations, but we can give you some really helpful tips. And it's very, very important that at this stage, at the stage when you're actually writing, that you show samples of your work to your supervisor. So I want to remind you that that's one of the main roles of the supervisor, not to correct your work, not to plan it for you. They could certainly look at samples of your paragraphs and they could give you some verbal feedback, some general verbal feedback about structure. Now I want to return to this point. I'm returning to the report that was written by the DES student in 2018 about Greek migrants. And I want to really use this slide to reinforce my message that you will not write good paragraphs unless your essay is carefully planned. What I've done here is I've taken out the different subheadings that this student has used in their essay. So a quick reminder, I'll just go back here. The essay question, the research question is forced migrants, burden or benefit. And you'll recall that she uses a case study method, and that means that she's going to focus on Greece, although she does look at the question of migrants more generally. Now, just returning very quickly to her plan, if we follow these different subheadings, you'll see how well planned this essay is and how those subheadings help you understand the stages of her argument. So, as with all reports, she introduces the topic and she explains why there's a debate about whether migrants are a good or a bad thing for countries. And these are her other subheadings. How do refugees impact economies? Why is there a negative stigma around being a refugee? At what point are refugees a burden to the economy? How has large influxes of refugees impacted host communities? Greece's economic struggles. Greece's fragile healthcare system. How have refugees improved the healthcare system? Who has taken action to improve the lives of those living in Greece? The mathematics behind successful integration. Volunteering at Solidarity Now and the impact of the stock market. Well, first of all, you'll notice that many of these are questions, and questions work very well as subheadings. They also demonstrate to you how carefully structured this essay is. And when we start to look at her paragraphs, I hope you see the value of this very clear sectional planning, makes the writing of paragraphs very easy. What's fantastic in this essay, and I'm going to post a copy of it for those of you who are interested in reading it, is this section here you might be curious about, volunteering at Solidarity Now. That is where this particular student actually went to Greece, and she combines her literature review and all of her reading with an actual ethnographic study of working in one of the migrant camps. It's one of the things that makes this a full marks EPQ. So just to conclude, as I move away from that slide with my little clincher statement, it is absolutely key to have an idea of what the function of the paragraph is within the essay. Now, I'm going to look at an example of a body paragraph, and it's taken from the section of the essay, How do refugees impact economies? Okay. According to Roger Zetta's journal on economic impacts of refugees, these forced migrants who initially have been situated for just a short period in their host community begin to thoroughly immerse themselves in the local economies. Now that is the opening topic sentence. It immediately guides the reader to what the paragraph is going to be about. And in this case here, she's used an example, so it's an academic example from Roger Zetta, who's an expert on the economic effects of refugees. She's used that to show that she's well read in this particular topic. And now we are the reader, we know that this paragraph is going to be about how forced migrants adapt into the communities and into the local economy. Now, as you know from previously, these are our supporting sentences over here. They go all the way down to this section over here. So you'll see that she's using different sources. She's talking about Kenya. She's getting information from the United Nations. She's giving us some statistics and some facts. So this is the burger part of the paragraph, the meat part of the paragraph that exemplifies. And you will see that each of these supporting statements are clearly linked to the topic sentence. She ends the paragraph by saying these statistics are only those that highlight the positive impacts on locals. They do not nearly begin to alliterate the transformations and positive effects on the refugees themselves and their living standards. So there you have your clincher statement. And it also clearly is what we could call a transition sentence, because it allows her to now move on to a different paragraph. So just to reiterate, very, very clear opening topic sentence. The majority of the paragraph is always the supporting facts, examples. Here in an EPQ report, you'll be showing your reading. Very often in these larger, longer paragraphs, you will have a number of academic references to your reading. And indeed, if we look at this particular paragraph, it was supported by these 4 references in this case. The term IBID means as before. And when you look at the paragraph, how it would actually look in the report, you would see that here would be the paragraph, and because this student is using the footnotes method of referencing, the reader is able to look very closely at this paragraph. See here we have the number 5. We're able to go down and see that that's a reference here to Zetta Rogers. Roger Zetta, I beg your pardon. Are refugees an economic burden or a benefit in this particular article, forced migration? And just as a reminder to you, don't forget that if you are using a website, this is excellent referencing. She has the date that she accessed the website, okay? So that's very good academic practice. So when you see the paragraph, it's carefully supported with footnotes and information. It gives a sense of deep reading and analysis and research. And that's what we're looking for in top EPQs. We're also looking for cohesion between paragraphs, okay? And for those of you who don't know, cohesion's like gluing. So often you might find your teachers, particularly your history or English teachers, will write to you that your essay doesn't flow or doesn't cohere. And that's because you haven't joined the ideas together in a logical way. And one of the key ways of joining ideas together, as the video from the Sydney University told us, is to use cohesive devices, discourse markers. Okay, so let's have a quick look at this paragraph here. She begins, more frequently, however, scholars, including Richard Zetter, do point to the economic burdens of refugees on communities, including imposed costs and social welfare, and the fact that they even distort markets to a certain extent. So I want you to see this again is a topic sentence, but the however signals to the reader that in the previous paragraph I talked about all these positive things with refugees, but now I'm also going to use Roger Zetter's work to show that there is a kind of negative impact. And so this paragraph follows on from the last one, but it is a kind of contrast between them. But this is how you establish cohesion, by making very clear references to what came before, and you can also make references to what is going to come later. Now, I just want to also point out in this paragraph, these are just some of the reasons why locals find it difficult to integrate such people into their communities, because in their eyes, they are not only using their services, but also reducing their standard of living for them and their children. There is your clincher sentence, a perfect example of one. Seeing those two paragraphs together, you can see how this particular student very skillfully moves from the positives to the negatives and makes it easy for the reader to follow. Now, if you listen to the video previously carefully, they used a phrase which I'm going to borrow from them: making your voice transparent. So when you are writing your EPQ report, it's not enough simply to talk about what you've read and paraphrase it. I want you to remember that your voice, here's this big mouth just to remind you, is absolutely important. So when you're giving the information, try to be argumentative or evaluative. And evaluative means you're saying what's strong about it. And this is a key skill in any paragraph writing, is not simply to lift information, not just to rephrase it, but to make it your own and to make sure that there's a voice that comes across very clearly. Now I'm going to move on to another excellent EPQ from the same year, 2018. This was a geography EPQ that had elements of economics in it as well as physical geography, some physics in it. The title was Relative Importance of Local and National Impacts and the Lessons Learned from the Kobe 1995 Earthquake. As you can see from these pictures here, Kobe absolutely devastated this part of Japan. And this EPQ is using Kobe as a case study once again. Now, if we have a look at this paragraph here, we have a subheading entitled Disaster and Structural Economic Change. Statistics and frameworks have been used more frequently over the years to analyze disaster recovery and improve and analyze response and vulnerability. Darcy and Kunritha, 1969, pioneered a framework response and economic analysis of disasters. So immediately we see again, we have a very clear opening topic sentence, and now we're going to go into the supporting sentences. Here she's using the Harvard method of referencing, which is called the in-text citation method. She's giving you the names of the researchers and the year of the research. Now, as you can see, this is the meat part of the paragraph where she gives you all of the supporting details. And she goes into a particular study and she uses another academic reference here, this time from two Japanese academics, Yukiyama and Yoshidi. Forgive my pronunciation there if it's wrong. and she talks about the tables and the calculations which are going to follow below. So I wanted to show you this as a different example of a paragraph where you might be pointing some data below. Now, media students will often use diagrams or photos or pictures, so your paragraph can be based on that picture. If you're doing maths, if you're doing history, if you're doing geography, you might want to use data, statistics, or tables. So your paragraph might be a kind of explanation of the data which is going to follow below or which was above the paragraph. So that's a different type of paragraph, and I want to emphasize again, just so that you can see that this is the Harvard method of referencing, where you will put down the names of the researchers and the date of the research. And the reference list, that's the bibliography at the end, will contain the full details of those studies. And now, this is an important slide as well, because I want you to see that one of the kinds of paragraphs that you might write is a kind of ending the section of the argument. And as you'll see, this is an excellent example of how to do this. Firstly, the discourse marker finally indicates to the reader that we're coming to the end of a stage of the argument. So here we have finally the importance of the JIS with JPS was discovered after the Kobe earthquake. These new areas of earthquake engineering were developed. In the same report by Earthquake Disaster Mitigation Research Center, September 1997, it was suggested that the focus on structural technologies were now less important, and now the attention of funding should be put on earthquake disaster management systems. So what's the function of this kind of paragraph? Well, as I say, it signals to the reader that this is the end of the argument. It sums up all of the argument from this section very tightly. And it has the clincher sentence over here. This recent development, an expansion of knowledge gained from Kobe 1995, is revolutionary in providing the vital aid to people in times of mega disasters like Kobe in the years to come, as well as aiming to reduce and mitigate the effects of the events through research. So it very clearly sums up and synthesizes what that section was about. So that kind of paragraph can be very important at reiterating and telling the reader why that section of the discussion is so important. So in conclusion, what have we looked at today? I've argued that that paragraphs are stages in your report or your argument. I've argued that paragraphs are not standard. They don't all look the same. I've argued that they perform different jobs according to their position in the report. And if I very briefly go back to this slide, you will remember that I discussed a variety of paragraphs that you may wish to use. I've said that a topic sentence is always worth using, and there will always be some kind of use of development sentences. Clincher sentences can be highly effective when you want to sum up the value of that particular paragraph. I can't reiterate enough how important it is that you plan your essay before writing your paragraph. Only then will you understand what function it serves within the essay. And I concluded by talking how important cohesion and flow is. If we return very briefly to my initial slide, we will see that blocks have to fit together neatly. Any builder or architect can tell you that. So in conclusion, the paragraphs are the building blocks of your argument, but you first need a sense of what it is that you are building before you begin. I hope you found this video very useful. Good luck with your reports.